Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Andrew Wilson, the Chief Content Officer at Matchbox IO. Today I'm going to talk about some best practices in creating an interactive voice experience. You know, where you interact with a computer using your voice. Specifically, I'll share 5 lessons we've learned at Matchbox. Hopefully I can help you avoid some trials and errors that we've gone through while designing voice applications. But first, before we dive into those lessons learned, I want to share some background on Matchbox. So we're the creators of some of the most popular voice experiences on Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Samsung Bixby, including the award-winning Question of the Day and Kids Quiz. We've got millions of users around the world in dozens of countries and in 4 different languages. Our portfolio includes 20 voice applications in 4 main categories: games, education, wellness, and utilities. In general, our goals are simple. 1, help people learn something new every day. 2, build voice experiences that make life easier or more fun, or ideally, a combination of the 2. So you might be asking why? Why voice? Well, let's explore that question. So voice interactions are here to stay. People are now interacting with smart speakers, with their cars, with their phones, with their appliances, using just their voice. It's a new way of interacting with a computer. You know, at one point there were punch cards, then the computer mouse, then the touch screen, and now voice, right? So thinking of smart speakers, here's a chart from VoiceBot, which shows how popular smart speakers are in the US. As you can see, the adult population in the US is at 259 million, and as of April this year, more than 90 million of them had a smart speaker, and the number of owners in the last 3 years nearly doubled. And here's a chart from Statista that shows the number of devices, not just smart speakers, but the number of devices with voice assistants worldwide. They're predicting that by 2023, there will be more devices with voice assistants in the world than there are people in the world. So voice is here to stay. It's not a novelty, it's here for the long term. But why? Well, here are some reasons why. It doesn't require fine motor skills or finger dexterity. So for someone who has lost those abilities, or for someone who hasn't yet developed them, voice makes information accessible. Along the same vein, voice also doesn't require sight or the ability to read. You just speak to access the information. And sometimes, honestly, it's just more convenient, right? For a lot of people, it's just easier to speak than it is to type. So for example, if I want to know the weather forecast, right? I can pick up my phone, I can unlock my phone, I can scroll through all my apps, find my favorite weather app, click on it, open it up, wait for it to load, or I could just say, hey, voice assistant, what's the weather today, right? It just makes things a little bit more convenient sometimes. Also, voice is more social than small screens. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here are 2 photos to demonstrate this. The family on the left, as you can see, is all in the same room. They're spending time together, but they're all on their own device. They're off in their own worlds. They're not interacting with each other. But the family on the right is using a voice experience, which brings everyone in the room together into a shared experience. It's just more social. So again, voice is here now, and it's an important part of our future. So let's get to building some really great voice experiences to help make people's lives a little easier and a little more fun. So the 5 lessons I want to share with you today may seem pretty straightforward, but speaking from experience, they're very easy to overlook for developers and for designers. So the first one is to focus on high quality content. The second is to create a clean design. The third is to conduct what we consider audio testing. For the 4th and 5th lessons learned, I'll focus on creating voice apps for kids, but there's actually some universal concepts involved. So the 4th, make the content age appropriate, truly age appropriate. And number 5, anticipate user responses. So let's dive into these one by one. So think about when you have visited a website for the first time. You probably found your way there because you're looking for something, right? Like the news or medical advice or a game. You were looking for content, right? Well, it's the same with voice. The user has come to gain information from you. Honestly, they don't care how clean your code is. They don't care how clever your design is. They've just come for the content. So at Matchbox, we aim to make sure our content is as high quality as our design and as our code. What does that mean, though, to have high quality content in a voice experience? Well, for us, it means thoughtful content that people want. It means bite-sized content, and it means fresh content. So thinking about content that people want, at Matchbox, our content isn't an afterthought. If you're playing Question of the Day, we're going to give you interesting, well-researched trivia questions. If you're playing Kids Quiz, we're going to give you parent-approved fun facts that have been researched and written by educators. Thinking about bite-sized content, our content isn't too long and it's custom fit for a smart speaker. So what that means is that it doesn't overwhelm your cognitive load. And we're going to get into cognitive load a little bit later. But here's an example. We designed Kids Quiz as an educational experience to help children learn more about the world, and we do this through questions and answers. So for our youngest Kids Quiz users, the youngest are around age 5 or 6. The entire experience is for ages 5 through 12, but the youngest ones are around age 5 or 6. We asked this question: during which of the 4 seasons does it get the hottest outside? Summer, winter, or spring? Now, if you saw that in writing, which I think you just did on your screen, that might be fine. It might read fine. But if you're solely relying on audio, it's a little too much. In fact, during beta testing, we realized that question was too long for smart speakers. It's too much cognitive load, especially for a 6-year-old. So we changed the question from during which of the 4 seasons does it get the hottest outside to the much more simple, when is it hottest outside? And thinking about fresh content. Much like websites and social media, we found that offering brand new content every day helps to bring users back and keep them more engaged. And this actually shows in our data. Our voice apps that provide fresh daily content, like question of the day, riddle of the day, daily stretch, they all have a much higher retention rate than the rest of our portfolio. Users know that when they use one of our voice apps, they're getting something fresh, they're getting something well designed, and they're getting something thoughtful, and there's always something new to discover. Okay, moving on to our second lesson learned, create a clean design. So I mentioned earlier how users don't care how clever your design is, which is true. They actually don't care. But they will definitely notice if your voice experience is difficult to use, right? So you want to aim for a clean design, making it easy for the user. So shorter is better in content, as we just discussed, and it's also better in design flow. You want to avoid giving too many options. At Matchbox, we've learned to give people a pretty direct path, and that works well for us. In Kids Quiz, the user chooses their topic or their level for the day, and then boom, they're into the experience. In Animal Rescue, the user chooses their animal, and then every few minutes they're given 2 choices in the story. But that's it. There aren't multiple layers to sort through. And for the user, it doesn't get complicated or confusing. So what this means is that they won't hear, choose from panda, turtle, tiger, ostrich, or lobster, or to hear more options, say more options. That's just too much for adults, right? Let alone for a 7-year-old. So we aim to provide 1, 2, or 3 choices and then get moving along in the experience. So keep in mind that I've mentioned this idea of clean design because we at Matchbox have found success in very transactional experiences. But we're all still in the early stages of the voice generation, and the space is rapidly moving towards a more conversational AI. Okay, now let's look at our third lesson learned, conduct audio testing. So I've mentioned that we focus on writing bite-sized content and that writing for a voice experience is different than writing for other marketing channels. Why is that though? Well, 2 words, cognitive load. So the cognitive load theory was developed by a scientist named John Sweller in the 1980s. Cognitive load relates to the amount of information that working memory can hold at one time. So again, it relates to the amount of information that your working memory can hold at one time. So Sweller said that since working memory has a limited capacity, instructional methods should avoid overloading it with additional activities that don't directly contribute to learning. Now, Sweller was talking about educational instruction, but this relates to voice interactions too. So what this means is that if you're using a voice experience where you're interacting with a computer using your voice, you're primarily relying on your hearing to understand what the computer has said back to you. And if the computer provides too much information, or if it goes on for too long, or if the content just becomes too much, right? You start to become a little lost. It's overwhelming. It's too much cognitive load, right? So at Matchbox, we double check that what we're providing through a voice app doesn't cause too much cognitive load. And we do this through what we call audio testing. So before we launch new content, Our team members listen to the content over a smart speaker or another device to make sure that it sounds natural and that it's easy to follow. And we found that when we don't overload our users with information, when those sentences are shorter, when there are fewer choices, they have a more enjoyable experience. Now, it's hard to really understand that until you conduct your own audio testing. And we didn't do this in the beginning, and users would complain that they couldn't understand what their device was saying, or they didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing. Well, audio testing has really helped make for a much better user experience. So as I mentioned earlier, our final 2 lessons learned are specifically about creating voice experiences for children, but there are some universal concepts involved. So let's talk first about age-appropriate content. It's easy to say that a voice experience is designed for, say, ages 5 through 12, or ages 5 through adults, or all ages, right? But it's important to remember that a 5-year-old is very different from an 8-year-old, who is very different from a 12-year-old, right? How they understand the world, how they process information, their brains are all very different. So what you create for each age group should also be different. I mentioned Kids Quiz earlier when we changed this sentence to, when is it hottest outside? So now let's think about who we should ask that question to. So if you asked a 12-year-old this question, when is it hottest outside, summer, winter, or spring? They'll kind of stare at you and wonder if this is a trick question in some way, right? But if you ask a 5-year-old this question, it'll make them think, but most of them will be able to figure it out. They'll be able to figure out the answer, right? So this content is really better for 5- and 6-year-olds and not for the full age range. So another example is this question. What's something that most people can't do? Smell a flower, lick their own elbow, or go to sleep? So in focus groups, one 5-year-old got this question and she frowned and she shrugged her shoulders and said, I don't know what people can't do. And I thought that was such a wise observation from a 5-year-old. She's only 5 years old. She doesn't know what people can't do, right? So this content is really more appropriate for slightly older kids. It'll make them think. They'll have some fun with it maybe, but most can figure out the answer. Okay, so this last lesson learned is my absolute favorite, my most fun lesson to be learned. So right now, voice recognition on smart speakers and other devices for children around age 6 and younger isn't as great as it is for older children and adults. It's getting better every day. The voice technology for kids is rapidly improving, but right now it's still not ideal right now. Well, one day we deployed new content for Kids Quiz and I was watching the errors come in and I noticed that child after child was being misunderstood by the smart speaker as saying, ask me not, when they answered a specific prompt. So 5- and 6-year-olds across the country again and again were being misunderstood and asked to repeat themselves when the smart speaker thought they said, ask me not. Well, I was really puzzled by this and looked into it. I checked the question that was being asked. And the question was, what do you call someone who goes into outer space? Are they a farmer, a teacher, or an astronaut? So child after child was answering astronaut, but the smart speaker thought they were saying ask me not. So think for a second how a 5-year-old might speak the word astronaut. Astronaut, right? It kind of sounds like ask me not. So this was a huge realization for us, and now we use a lot more synonyms or acceptable alternative responses, right? And what's more, and what's actually super fun, is when we're writing for young children, we actually say the possible responses out loud in a young child's voice to hear what other words they might sound like. So try this at home in your best child's voice and take a look at this list. These are actual examples of where a child was responding to one of our voice apps, but the smart speaker misheard them. So the first one there we just talked about, they said astronaut, and the smart speaker thought they said ask me not. The second one there, a child was really excited that they knew the answer, and they said fish, fish, fish. And the smart speaker thought they said physicist. And then the third one, the child said winter, and the smart speaker thought they said wind care. And then goose, Zeus, librarian, life brain. So in each of these instances, and in hundreds more like them, we added a lot of acceptable answers that sound like the word we're looking for. And we also improved our algorithms to allow for a greater range of synonyms. So this way, no matter how the user pronounces the word, they'll have a successful experience with us. So try that at home in your best 5-year-old voice. One last thing I should mention is that while we just discussed monitoring what users are saying in our voice apps for kids, the same should be done with all ages, right? There might not be the same type of speech recognition errors, but there will be other errors that might surprise you, and that will allow you to further refine your experience. All right, as I said earlier, voice is here to stay, and it's only growing in popularity. This is a very exciting time to be part of what's known as the voice first revolution. So after all, take a look at where we're headed. You know, science fiction can give us a lot of inspiration for what's to come. I mean, think about Star Trek. If the captain needs some information or context to a situation, they just start speaking to the computer, right? And think about Star Wars. The droids R2-D2 and C-3PO are made by different manufacturers. They are different generations of technology, but humans can interact with both of them. Humans don't have to remember the correct wake word, right? And the droids themselves can understand humans and their fellow robots, and they share information with each other. And that's where we're headed. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me. If you'd like to learn more about who we are, I invite you to visit our website at matchbox.io, and feel free to reach out to me directly on the information on your screen. Thanks so much.